Thanks so much to everyone for being here tonight. My name is Ash. I'm a member of the Firestorm Collective, and I am super excited to hear tonight's event about Death in the Mouth, original horror by people of color. Before we start, if this is your first time joining an event with us, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a 14-year-old worker-owned cooperative and radical bookstore in so-called Asheville, North Carolina. We're an anarchist collective that specializes in titles related to feminism, queerness, social movements, and radical politics. Firestorm is also a community event space. However, due to the ongoing pandemic, we continue to hold all of our community and author events entirely online. With that said, we do have a list of exciting virtual events coming up. Next Thursday, November 3rd, we'll host writer and organizer Shane Burley in conversation with contributors to the new collection from AK Press, No Passeron, Anti-Fascist Dispatches from a World in Crisis. So if you're interested in signing up for that or any other event happening through Firestorm, you can follow us on social media, and I will drop a link to our community calendar in the chat. A quick note for folks who are attending in the live audience tonight, our speakers would love to field your questions. So if you're interested in asking anything at any point, I'll just encourage you to go ahead and submit them through the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen if you're attending it on Zoom, and in the comments if you're following along on the Facebook live stream. Cool. Moving on to tonight's event. What is horror to those living on the margins? Death in the Mouth is a collection of horror stories and art showcasing BIPOC storytellers from around the world. Editors Sloane, Leong, and Cassie, Hart bring together an incredible range of stories and illustrations that celebrate a diversity of voices and showcase the terrifying and exquisite scope of what horror can be. Sloane Leong is a cartoonist, illustrator, writer, and editor of mixed Indigenous ancestries. Through her work, she engages with visceral futures and fantasies through a radical, kaleidoscopic lens. She's currently living on Chinook land, what is now known as Portland, Oregon, with her family and 3 dogs. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Sloane at this point to introduce our authors and contributors tonight and talk a little bit about the book.
Yay. Thank you, Ash. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you everyone who's attending to come listen to our very cool horror stories. Yeah, Death in the Mouth, if you haven't heard of it, no, I'm sure you've heard of it because you're here. But yeah, it has 26 short stories, each with their own original illustration accompanying them. The collection spans genre, as in there's like horror, like sci-fi horror, there's surreal horror, there's mythological horror. We have a really cool, just expansive collection of horror stories, and yeah, I'm very proud of it. Yeah, tonight we'll be listening to 3 authors read from their stories in the anthology. First author will be Kelsea Yu. Kelsea Yu writes dark speculative fiction. She was born in Nanjing and is now based in New York. And she's a graduate of Odyssey Writing Workshop. And her new debut novel, Direwood, is out. And you can find her work at KelseaYuWrites.com. We also have Kelsea Yu, who spent her childhood in San Francisco and in Portland, Oregon, where she haunted her local libraries and crafted weird creatures out of clay. I love clay. She's eternally enthusiastic about sharks and appreciates a good ghost story. Kelsea lives with her husband, children, and a pile of art supplies in Seattle. Her work is published in the Classic Monsters Unleashed anthology, and you can find her on Instagram at A Novel Escape or on her website, KelsieYu.com. And then finally, we have Endria Isa Richarson. is a Black Malaysian and gay American writer from Worcester, Massachusetts. You can find more of her fiction and essays about ghosts, bird monsters, aliens of all kinds, and interior weirdnesses at EndriaRicharson.com. There we go. That's all our authors tonight, and I'm very excited to get into the readings. So the first up in our little lineup tonight is Kelsea Yu, and she's going to be reading her story, Balloon Girl.
Great, thank you for the introduction. So excited to be here. It's gorgeous, so you should get a copy. I love just doing that. Anyways, I'll just be reading now. Balloon Girl. The first time Jenny considered the dreadful secret, she shut her eyes and zipped her mouth tight. The words were struggling to get out, whistling through the small spaces between her teeth, but she managed to stop them right on time. She raced home, quick as a whip, and blew them straight into a pink party balloon. The balloon swelled, and Jenny tied the rubbery end into a tight knot. From then on, whenever she thought about the dreadful secret, she repeated the same steps, always in the same order. Run upstairs, close the door, blow the words in, with her fingers gripped tight around the elastic neck so they wouldn't wheeze back out, then push the balloon into the very back of her closet. She couldn't breathe a word to anyone, since the last thing she wanted was to disappoint her hardworking parents. But because Jenny kept fueling it, it wasn't long before the balloon began to change. The form shifted, morphing from a small sphere into a much larger oblong one. Soon, another shape protruded from it, then another, all of them swelling with Jenny's burgeoning secret. New colors emerged too, dull blacks, warm browns, fleshy pinks, Jenny's colors. The balloon grew rubbery, shoulder-length black hair, and ears that stuck out the same as Jenny's did. Skinny legs extended out along with what Jenny presumed were feet, encased in rubbery white Converse knockoffs. The balloon grew large brown eyes and a small blunt nose, and the part that Jenny blew into looked just like her own pursed mouth. The balloon began to push back, first against her clothes, and then against the slated white door. And now when Jenny breathed her secret into it, it pushed back against her too. Every time Jenny pressed her lips to the rubber opening, it puckered up into a long, quivering kiss. The pink cheeks puffed, and the balloon clung to her, making the ends of Jenny's hair tingle with static. Its bulbous eyes gleamed with what Jenny feared was knowledge. When Jenny slunk up to her room, because she moved listlessly these days, with no more bounce in her step, she saw that the closet had been left agape. She pushed through all her clothes, prim piano recital dresses and well-loved overalls alike, with drooping hands. The balloon girl was nowhere to be found. Jenny could hear her mother and father laughing in the kitchen, clearly delighted by something. When she crept down the stairs and slowly turned the corner, her insides constricted sharply. She saw that the balloon girl was sitting between her parents, sitting as though she had always belonged there. The secret was out in the open now, and her parents didn't even seem to notice that this thing wasn't her. Her mother's long hair grew frizzy with static. Her father's salt and pepper hair stuck straight up. The two of them were leaning in, flesh hands placed gently over the balloon girl's rubber ones. They were oblivious to their real daughter. There was a knife on the counter. Her mother had been busy cutting white radishes and bitter melons for dinner. The stock pot bubbled and hissed as Jenny took the weapon wordlessly. The balloon girl tilted slowly in her chair so that the two girls were now facing each other. Under the fluorescent yellow light, the pink neck gleamed. Jenny saw that the rubber mouth was stretched terribly, nearly bursting. The dreadful secret was palpable and present. The dreadful secret was threatening to spill out. Jenny pierced the balloon girl, square in the center of her rubbery daisy print shirt, before she could ruin everything. Too late, Jenny realized the obvious mistake. The balloon girl was hissing, the dreadful secret, the dreadful secret, the dreadful secret, as all the air ran out of her, in a long whoosh of garbled sound. It came out strangled and rasping, flecking Jenny with wet spray as she stood quiveringly, cringing from the impact. The balloon shuddered and flailed, and in its last gasp, Jenny swore that the trembling rubber fingers had reached for her. Then there was nothing left but a punctured pink balloon, glistening with Jenny's own spit. "What's going on?" her mother asked the real Jenny. Her voice was steady and calm, like she knew what Jenny was hiding. Both of her parents turned to their flushed, deflated daughter. As Jenny looked at them, and they looked back at her back slowly straightened. There was something that pulled taut between the three of them, invisible and elastic. Their family bond. Was it too flimsy? Would it snap, stretched as it was by the dreadful secret? Her mother and father waited for an answer, with neutral expressions that gave nothing away. Jenny imagined their reactions, anger, disgust, disappointment, swirling together and distending into something bigger. It all felt so precarious. Reveal too little, and she might implode. Reveal too much, and she would certainly suffer sharp consequences. Her mouth grew rubbery as they continued to stare at her. She drew a long, deep breath. Air filled her lungs and stretched through her very fingertips. Her whole body swelled with anticipation. Maybe things would be fine. Maybe things wouldn't be for yet a while. The worry faded. No matter the outcome, it had to come out now. And when Jenny finally exhaled the words, she felt unexpectedly buoyant.
Yay, thank you, Catherine. I love that story. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I feel like when me and Cassie were well, and I should say we'll have a discussion after the readings. I got way too excited to hear everybody read and didn't mention that. So yeah, after everyone's readings, we'll chat a little bit about the stories. But yeah, this one has like a hopeful ending, and I feel like that gets a lot of like not a lot of guff in horror circles. But I feel like people are like, oh, if it has like a hopeful ending, it's like it's not horror or something. But I don't know. To me, the power of the actual character of the balloon girl, like it's just so good. And I think it seats it very perfectly within the horror genre. Yeah, I love it a lot.
Thank you. It's like fighting yourself, sort of.
Yeah.
If it were like
our inner balloon self.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. And okay, next up we have Kelsea. And she's going to read from her story, which I'm very excited about. Kelsea, take it away with Obedient Son.
Thank you, Sloane. And I agree, this book is gorgeous. It's so pretty. Like, I hope you all get a physical copy because it's worth it. Okay, so Obedient Son. It began with a tickle in the back of Wang An's throat, light as a goose feather. She let out a long, rasping wheeze and would have thought no more of it. But her son, Chun Wei, recently returned from his apprenticeship with Dr. Sung in Beijing, gave her a long, searching look. When he relayed his concern, suggesting she rest while he brought her red date ginger tea and massaged her feet, she sneered at him. If you cared so greatly for my well-being, you would never have abandoned me for 3 years without the courtesy of first acquiring a wife to care for me in your absence. Mu Qing, Chun Wei said, I left to make my fortune, for the girl I wished to marry is from a well-respected family. They would accept no small bride price. Her lips curved up. And how did that choice go for you, son? Chun Wei dipped his head. Her family did not wait for me to return with my fortune. She was married to a high-ranking official last autumn. Wang An nodded. They had spoken of this many times before, but she was not ready for her son's pain to fade. Heartbreak was well-deserved punishment for his abandonment. It mattered not that circumstances had been different when Chun Wei left for his apprenticeship. He had been a second son then, free to pursue fortune-seeking, while Wang An's first son, Chun Xing, her golden child, held the responsibility of marrying a respectable woman. After toiling as a daughter-in-law and a mother for many long years, it had been Wang An's turn, at last, to command a daughter-in-law of her own. Then her eldest son died before he could wed. Upon Chun Xing's death, Chun Wei should have returned immediately to marry a village girl, someone obedient and capable who would devote her life to helping Wang An. Instead, he insisted on completing his apprenticeship, lovesick for that ridiculous girl he so treasured. Chen Xing would never have placed love for a girl over filial duty. Though neither mentioned him, Chen Xing stood between them, a widening gap between mother and remaining son. Do not speak to me of rest, Wang An said. I have toiled long hours in your absence. I will not change my ways simply because you have deigned to return. Yes, mother, Chen Wei said, bowing before returning to his studies. For several weeks, Wang An felt her movement slowing, her body weakening, but she refused to speak of it. She spent all of her dwindling energy cleaning the house. Still, more dust seemed to accumulate than she could manage, and cooking the same simple meal of rice and vegetables seemed to grow more exhausting each day. Each night, she went to bed earlier. Chen Xing would have called for the village doctor immediately. He would have understood that her protests were mere duty and insisted she lie down to rest while his wife, for he would have married by now, took care of the household. But Chen Wei was all she had left, and he was meek as a kitten. He merely sent concerned glances his mother's way when he thought she wasn't looking and waited until nightfall to sweep the dusty floors. For all his bluster about the many medicines Dr. Song had taught him to make, he had offered them to his mother only once, early on, and had not persisted after her initial refusal. Each time Wang An coughed, she glared at Chen Wei. If only he had been the one to die instead of his older brother. The more she considered, the more she wondered if this was Chen Wei's fault. Perhaps by speaking his worry aloud, he had invited illness into their home. 儿子，快来, Wang An called out one morning, hours past when she normally awoke. Chen Wei burst into her bedchamber, panic written across his features. Good, he should be startled. Wang An had looked into her mirror that morning. She knew how she looked. Her face had grown pale as the flesh of a lychee, a stark contrast with the black, matted hair clinging to her forehead. Her cheeks had grown sunken. She was still in her bedclothes, tangled between rumpled sheets soaked in sweat. Muqing, Chen Wei looked agape. Wang An felt herself grow annoyed. He should be assuring her that her illness was not as severe as it seemed. It was his duty, as her son, to accept the burden of her illness, not to let his jaw hang open like a timid child watching his first chicken slaughter. You must prepare me one of those remedies you love to brag about, or are they a fool boy's boasts? I will gladly prepare you a dose, mother. Quickly! Chen Wei left in a hurry. Wang An sat up to listen. Their house was small and the walls thin. She heard her son open a lock, probably the chest of medicinal herbs he had hauled back from Beijing. She watched him run past her doorway, carrying several pouches and jars to the open kitchen. She heard the roar of a flame before the fragrant aroma of the soup she had cooked often for her family, flavored with ginger, wild yams, lotus root, bamboo shoots, and wood ear, filled the house. Then a sharp, medicinal scent cut through the air. Good. Maybe he wasn't completely useless after all. Wang An heard her son approaching and quickly laid back down. With two hands, Chen Wei carried a bowl of soup into the room and set it on the table beside Wang An's bed. I am too weak to drink it on my own, you fool, Wang An snapped. Abashed, Chen Wei quickly helped his mother up before lifting the bowl for her to sip. Wang An took one sniff of the soup her son had prepared and turned up her nose. There is no meat in this broth. Mother, I have taken a Buddhist vow. I shall neither drink wine nor eat meat, and I will not harm a living creature. To Wang An's annoyance, Chen Wei offered his explanation with the exaggerated patience of the young, as if she had still failed to grasp the words he had spoken often since his return from the capital. She understood his words, just as she understood that once again he valued something trivial over his own mother. You are breaking your vow in your own refusal, for without meat, I will grow weaker and die, and I am a living thing. Mother, I have put the finest herbs in this broth, a recipe devised by Dr. Song himself, and I assure you it will help. What a useless son I have raised, Wang An lamented. All I ask for is what every other mother in the village already has, an obedient son. Chen Wei bowed his head. Mother, will you not try the soup first? She lay back down in the sheets. Be gone, and do not bring me a weak broth again. He left the room. Wang An heard her son pace back and forth throughout the small house. She caught a phrase here and there as he muttered to himself. He seemed sure that his medicinal broth, administered regularly, would cure her. but he whined to himself about how he could not force her to take it, and still he refused to forsake his vow. At last, he stopped by Wang An's room and informed her that he planned to visit the local Buddhist temple to meditate. She shooed him away in disgust. What was there to meditate upon? How dare he consider a foolish vow of equal import to his mother's health? The longer he was gone, the more agitated Wang An grew. He should be here at home, tending to her needs. The front door did not creak open until the sun had begun to set. Upon his return, Chen Wei did not stop by Wang An's room. Instead, she heard chopping from the kitchen. She listened for the sound of clucking to indicate that her son had traded something, a medicine of his own making perhaps, for one of the neighbor's chickens to slaughter. When no such sound rose to her ears, Wang An pursed her lips. Had he traded for a cut of meat then, or would he try to tempt her with another meatless soup? Wang An waited. This soup was taking far longer to cook than the last batch. Her stomach growled, protesting her lack of food all day. Just when Wang An was about to shout for her son, a yelp from the kitchen startled her. The fool boy must have touched the hot cooking pot. At last, Chen Wei entered the room, bowl in hand. His palm was wrapped tightly in a strip of cloth. He set down the bowl, helped his mother up, and lifted the soup to her chin. Wang An sniffed the broth suspiciously. The aroma was different this time. Something in it reminded her of the scent of the butcher's stall on a morning of slaughter. She looked up at her son, whose face was impassive, if paler than this morning. She took a sip, noting her son's look of great relief. At the first taste of broth, something tangy and pungent, almost like pig's blood, her head lifted, and a grin threatened to break out. She quickly suppressed it. No need for her second son's head to grow any bigger. That doctor had already filled his pliable mind with too many suggestions of grandeur. It is acceptable, she told Chen Wei. She waited until he sagged in relief. Then she added, but next time, put chunks of meat directly into the soup, not merely in the broth. Don't you want me to regain my strength? Of course, mother, Chen Wei bowed. A bead of sweat dripped down his forehead, but he said nothing more.
Yay. Thank you, Kelsea. That's such a good point to stop. Just the perfect little teaser of what's to come. Yeah, it gets pretty buck wild with that broth is all I'll say for now. Yeah, thank you. We'll talk more about it after. Endria, would you like to do your reading next and read some of Wind Up Teeth?
Yes, I would love to.
Yay.
Great. Okay. And agreed, this book is so beautiful. I'm going to read a little excerpt from the middle of the story. The light outside hadn't been right for some days before it began to rain in earnest on Tuesday. It looked sour, Miles had said, and he was right, even though Cam said light couldn't be sour. The clouds had laid dark-bellied, patched with yellow, on a sky so pale it looked green. Now the strange and blunt light pushed into the shuttered house through the plastic skylight in the hallway that was too high to reach and board up. Come on, said Sarah, waiting at the bottom of the stairs, feeling uneasy. Since Tuesday night, after the phone lines and the power went out, and they built a pillow and blanket fort in the living room, they hadn't been upstairs. They stayed downstairs whenever Dad left for food. Miles stuck his thumb in his mouth and grabbed Cam's hand. Sarah squeezed Miles' shoulder, and he pressed his hard round head into her stomach. Ara, he mouthed around his thumb. You're gonna wind up teeth and one soggy thumb, she said, but she smiled. There's more candles in the basement. I can get them before we go up. In the hallway, the rain banged the skylight. Sarah wished she could turn it off. Her ears ached from pounding rain. Her stomach ached with hunger. We'll get them together. Cam looked at her. The line of his mouth and his skinny jaw made him look so much like a small, stupid version of their dad that the corners of Sarah's eyes stung, and she felt angry enough to hit him. She stared back and tightened her own mouth. All right, Cam said after some time and looked sideways. Get them and we'll wait for you. At the basement stairs, Sarah flipped the light switch twice before she remembered the power was off. She clenched her jaw and ran down the stairs and didn't think about how somebody could reach between the treads and grab her, send her crashing headfirst into the stone. At the bottom of the steps, she stood, blinking. Breathe, she told herself. Breathe, be calm. Something rustled behind the row of thick plastic bins lined up at the far end of the basement behind the furnace. She breathed, and her mouth filled up with water, and her stomach clenched again, scared and hungry and disgusted. It was just mice. They'd always had mice. Mice in the spring, making babies inside where they were safe from hunters. Green and littered floodwater slicked halfway up the thick basement window, making the space dimmer and greener than the hallway upstairs. A line of scum marked the last high water. Now it lapped 2 inches above the line. It had flooded plenty of times before, Sarah told herself, in a new, calm and grown-up voice that asserted itself over the panic that was rising in her belly. Most of her and Cam's life, all of Miles' life. The water always dropped back down, no matter how high it rose. She held on to this like a rope. The water always drops back down, above something dark and sharp moving quickly in her stomach, trying to pull her down from the inside. And Dad comes back when he says he will. She slid her hand along the cool and damp cement wall, not letting herself think about where her dad was and when he would be back, until she hit the sharp metal edge of the basement cabinet. She groped for the handle in the quarter light and swung the door open. She didn't think about wet, matted animals stalking her while her back was turned, rooting around in the cabinet, dark and dampened further with shadows. She pushed aside tins and glass jars of vegetables and sauces that she should take upstairs, but not right now. Now she needed to find the candles wrapped in towels high enough so that the water didn't reach them, and bring them upstairs to Cam and Miles, and the soft light from the kerosene lamp, and the safe warmth of their pillow and blanket fort where she would read Miles' picture books, and they would go back to waiting for Dad to come once the rain had stopped. Her hand touched something soft and warm and large. It moved and fell at her feet. She screamed. What? What? Sarah! Cam was there down the stairs, breathing hard. He bent to where she pointed and picked up the dark mass. It broke apart, and he dropped it and flung his hands away from his body. It's a nest, he said, disgusted. Nest? Yes, it's a nest. He held the little fragments that were clinging to his palms toward her, and she took a step back without meaning to. I already touched it. He rubbed his fingers and then inspected them. It's bits of rags and paper and some kind of hard things. He bent to inspect the gray oblong that broke apart when he picked at it. Small bits of white showed through even in the sour non-light of the basement. Bones, Sarah said. Bones and fur. Hair. Don't, Cam. She stared at him. Do you think... It's not big, Cam broke in. He showed her the small white thing that had emerged from the gray oblong. It covered half his palm. It was the size of a rabbit skull. It was a rabbit skull, she thought. It's not big enough, he said. It's just hair, teeth, and bones wrapped together. Something ate them. Cam was quiet. Yeah, an animal. He don't eat things this small. Nothing else could be said after that. They were both quiet, standing, listening to the rain. And then Cam's teeth flashed and his quick palms, full of their clotted mess, shot out. He wrapped his arm around her neck and grabbed a handful into her hair. She gripped his fist, digging her nails in until he let go and shoved them away. He laughed, eyes white round set into the dark. She pulled back her arm, my wing, my claw, she thought, and raked her fingers across his face. He lifted his fingers to touch blood. Fuck you, bitch, he spat and ran up the basement stairs without her. She ran after him. He had never said that before. The piece that he had held in place dropped inside of her, sank into the dark and clawed thing. In the hallway, light opened up. The world was made of objects again. It was not just one long, dim field of gray with darker shapes hidden inside it and flashes of white bone. Cam, she said, I'm sorry. She saw that Kim was going to say something else, but then he heard it too, like a chair scraped up and dropped above them. He stopped with his mouth partially open, gleaming and wet. The light in the hallway darkened then, and Cam's brown face became a shape. Then it was light again as whatever had been above the skylight passed. Where's Miles? Above them, the skylight was turning dark, then light, then dark, then light. Miles, Miles, answer. Miles was not in the hall or in the kitchen. He didn't go outside, Sarah said. No, Cam agreed. The door was closed and locked and the rain pounded on it. I can't think with the damned rain. Miles, he yelled, stop playing. Sarah pushed Cam ahead of her and they tripped upstairs they couldn't see, their legs and arms tangled between them. Upstairs on the landing, they peered into the dark. The rain was like rocks thrown on the roof. The rain was like feet or like claws on the roof. Sarah clawed at her head. She wished it would stop. Something huddled at the end of the hallway.
Yay. Thank you, Endria. So good. Such real. I think one of the reasons I like the story a lot, besides what comes towards the end of the story, is just the sibling dynamic. I'm also from I have a younger brother and sister, so I vibed with being an older sibling, and it just all the tension and conflict that comes with that. But yeah, thank you all for reading. So cool. I'd love to talk more about your stories now, if you're all cool with that. One of the first questions that everyone asks, it can be a little bit annoying, but like, what was the seeds for your story? What initially came to you when you started writing? This can be like really vague, because I know a lot of us are like maybe more exploratory writers over like plotters. But I feel like all of your stories have really strong core concepts, and I would just love to know more about how those developed. Endria, would you want to go first?
Oh, sure. This story is a little bit unique in terms of process and what led to it, in that I was in a science fiction workshop called Viable Paradise at this point 4 years ago, in 2018 or 2019. And we had to write a short story in 3 days while we were there, and they laid out kind of a bunch of props that we could choose, and that was meant to act as like a prompt for the story. And so
cool.
My prompt was a pair of those little like red plastic wind-up teeth, and so the story is called Wind Up Teeth, and it starts with a little toy wind-up teeth that the siblings are all playing with. But yeah, that was really the basis for it, it's a different process than what usually happens with my stories, but I really enjoyed kind of having to work within those parameters and make those teeth into something like unexpected and creepy.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so cool. So did you do a lot of like planning, like once you got your like visual prompt, or did you just start writing with that first line or something?
Yeah, I think I just started panic writing and saw
nice.
wherever the story would go.
Very cool.
And then I revised it a lot over, the next few years. Not like continuously, but kept returning.
Right. Yeah, totally. Oh, that's so cool. I love that. Kelsea, do you want to talk a little bit about your story's initial germ?
Yeah. So Obedient Son is actually the second short story I ever wrote. Like, I wrote novels for 5 years before starting, so I wasn't totally new to story, but was pretty new to short story.
Mm.
And the first short story I wrote just sort of came out. It was, a story that I wrote at a time of trauma and grief. And so I didn't really plan it. I just wrote it. And then I got hooked on short stories. So I wanted to write more, but because the first one had been so unintentional in the way I started it, I couldn't figure out how to replicate that. And so I thought, one thing I've been interested in for a while is learning more Chinese mythology and folklore. So I thought, why not try retelling? Because I also love retellings. So I started reading Chinese folklore tales and just flagging stories that interested me, ones that, especially horror-ish ones, because this was also around the time when I got really into horror.
Gotcha.
And I found there were quite a few, which was really fun. I initially thought that they might be more like fantasy-ish, but there were a few horror-ish stories in there, which was exciting. And when I found the tale that Obedient Son is a twisted retelling of, it was just so clear to me how I could twist it and make it my own. And from there, the story just kind of took off.
Oh, that's so cool. Can I ask what the original was about? Was it intended to be kind of cautionary, or was it more I don't know, adventure-y? I'm curious what the vibe was with the original one.
The original one was actually very short. I expanded it a lot, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if it's exactly cautionary, but I'm trying not to spoil the story, which is why.
Oh yeah. True.
But I think it just, the original story was actually more of a tragedy, I guess.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's got a horror element, but it's really a tragedy. And so I kind of leaned into those things.
Oh, interesting. Very cool. Yeah, I love that. I think yours is probably has the most classical flavor in the anthology. It's a nice little kind of break from form from the rest of them, which is cool. What about you, Catherine? You want to talk a little bit about developing Balloon Girl or writing Balloon Girl?
Yeah. I think I pretty much knew immediately it was going to be a flash story. So that was a nice restriction, because I feel if I don't restrict some aspects, then I'll never write anything. So I think length was a big one for me. And then something that I really wanted to focus on was texture. So I think length and texture were sort of things that I really kept in mind while I was writing it, and the process of revising it, and the tension of elasticity, obviously. So I think those sort of were the main components of it that I was working towards.
Very cool. Interesting. Did any of you have challenges with these stories? I know some of them were, for some of the authors, it was very quick to get them out. Others, they sat on these stories for a long time. What was your experience with editing and revising your stories?
I guess I can go. I guess for me, I knew it was gonna be flash, but I couldn't tell how. I knew the ending. I knew there's a bug. I'm
no, it's
so
okay.
mad. I'm so mad because it's out of view, and I can it's always around, but fine. I knew it was gonna be short, but I did make a slightly longer version.
Okay.
It's just not right, and it's just no, this needs to be a really constrained story. I think it was a pretty straightforward process, but in terms of length, I did experiment with making it a longer flash, and it's just no, I think because of the mood and the tone too, I wanted it to be punchy, and I think that felt ultimately right.
Oh, interesting. That's cool. Yeah, I think additive editing is kind of underrated, but it can definitely, I don't know, it can give you so much new material, but at the same time also kind of show you where this is all kind of ancillary. But yeah, that's cool that you were able to kind of keep it a really tight short story. What about you, Endria?
Yeah. So I wrote this initially in 2019. I'm pretty sure it was 2019. And put it away and didn't look at it for I think for maybe like a year. And at that point, I think the first draft was the like bones of it were there, the teeth and the bones. But I think that like after just letting it sit, I think I really like working on short fiction in this way of like writing something and just putting it away for a long time and just letting like the themes and the plot and like the calculus of it sort of marinate in my head.
Right.
And came back to it and I think had a clear idea of what the sort of menace in the story was and how that menace related to the siblings. A lot of like what was there in the first draft were just sort of the like atmospheric, ominous vibes. I think I was able to really sharpen that in like subsequent drafts to make it more concrete and a little more not just vibes.
Interesting. That's very cool. I think what like hearing you read it again, I really like the kind of ambiguity around like I don't want to spoil it, but like they both fear their dad, but also seem to have like little moments about becoming like him. And I kind of really like that because it's like, is that something that they're looking forward to? But it's like I don't know, there's just like so many condensed feelings that they were like clearly grappling with, and I just like really love that that they couldn't like fully articulate, but it was interesting to see in like little moments. Like when she was like ripping her arm away from her brother and then she thought of her arm as like a wing as well. I was like, oh, that's good stuff. Kelsey, do you want to talk about your editing process or how your story changed?
Yeah. So I think one of the challenges with retellings in general is striking that balance, because you want it to stay true to the original story, but at the same time, I think you have to be bringing in something new, because otherwise, why bother retelling it?
Yeah, totally.
Like I find I'm always paying attention to that when I'm reading retellings, so I knew that would be something that would be tricky to figure out when I was writing one. And like for Obedient Son in particular, I think the writing style was the part that I had the hardest time balancing, because like I really, really wanted it to read like the folklore tales that I was, retelling. But at the same time, those tales don't really go that deep in terms of characterization.
Right.
Modern stories tend to be far, far deeper that way. And so like I couldn't actually quite find the right balance until I got Sloane, your and Cassie's feedback helped me improve that so much. Like it was one of those cases where I knew there was something special in the story, but I couldn't quite get it right. And then once I got the feedback, it just all kind of lined up and came together. And then I ended up spending some time first, actually brainstormed with my mom to try to figure out how like incorporate that feedback and just like go deeper with the character. She's my consultant for many story things, and especially Chinese stories. So
that's awesome. Getting it from the source.
yeah. And so then after that, I spent a few days revising and love the story so much more now.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah. I feel like I led you into like talking about I forgot like me and Cassie revised it with you.
No, but that was actually like I loved it. I'm so grateful that this story ended up with Death in the Mouth and with the two of you, because I think it just turned into its best form. So.
Yay, I'm so glad. Yeah, I'm just obsessed with the mother in your story. And when we first read it, I was like, I just need more of her. I just needed to shave, like, I just wanted to layer shave down so I could just get into her head, because it was just like, oh, just the rest of the story is so good about how she's like rationalizing with herself, but also kind of not. She like she's like a nightmare entity of filial piety, you know, like this is what I deserve. And I just, yeah, me and Cassie had just fell in love with that, with your story. Like, it's so good. Yeah, I'm glad our editing was like helpful. It was something that we were very like unsure of, but at the same time I was like, I don't know, it's so hard to get feedback a lot of the times, and I was like, if I was in submitting to something or part of something, like I would want feedback.
Yeah.
So I'm glad it didn't feel too like oppressive or like
Not at all.
trying to like, you know, change it around too much. I was just like, I don't know, I just had so many questions, and I'm glad some of those questions were like a little generative for you, I guess.
It helped a lot.
So glad. Yes. Oh, another question I want to ask, which I'm going to actually share my screen now. I want to talk about the art, about your feelings on the art. Let me pull up a little ebook I have. Can you see this? Art? Okay, sweet. Okay, Endria. So this is the piece that goes with Endria's story. How did you feel about the art? Because like, or just for the audience, I didn't like really have the authors consult with the artists. I basically sent the artists the short story and allowed them to basically just interpret what they would from the story. I didn't try to direct them. Most of them I know their work pretty well and like what they're good at. And so I was like, okay, I trust you completely. Like, you do your thing. So all the art was, you know, kind of a surprise to the author. So I'm very interested in how you feel about it.
Oh my gosh, I love it so much. I'm actually gonna see if I can. I have it like framed
Oh yeah,
on
oh
my
my
wall
gosh.
over there.
Hold on, let me
I don't
stop
know
my
if you
share so I
guys
can
will
see.
see it, but
Oh, that's so cool.
I was so excited when I saw it. I think that it's part of the reason why I was so excited to be accepted into this anthology. I think collaborating with other people, with other artists, whether that's through illustration or like any kind of cross collaboration, I feel like brings this new like reality into any work. And I found yeah, I just was so psyched about the art. I think it's not like if I would have drawn the house or the monster or the kids, they would have looked different. And I think I love how like another artist can sort of make me see things that I wouldn't have otherwise seen.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was just really psyched about it. And
So
I love
cool.
all of the other illustrations by the other artists are so exciting too.
Yeah. I'm so glad you like it. And they have a hung up that is so cute. I'm gonna tell Rem for sure. She's gonna be thrilled. Let me pull up. Wait, hold on. I gotta share. Let's see. Then we have Kelsea's illustration. Oh yeah, the last one is by Sulala, also known as Rem. This one is by Audrey Murdy. And yes, Kelsea, how did you feel about this illustration?
So it's so funny you have yours framed. I haven't gotten mine printed and framed yet, but I actually have plans to do so as well.
Nice.
It is like, when I saw it, I screamed. I was in the car. My husband and I were driving down to see family, and he was driving. So I saw it pop up, and like I was dying to show it to him, but obviously did not want to call the crowd.
You're like, look.
And I was like, oh, I have to sit with this for like 2 hours before we finish driving. But I like, one thing that means a lot to me that the artist did for the story was to do the illustration in a style that matches the original folklore tales. So the folklore tale that Obedient Son is a retelling of is from Pu Song Ling's Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio. And some of those stories have these kind of old like lithograph style illustrations that accompany them. And I just love it. Like this feels perfect for retelling because kind of like how I described writing Obedient Son, the art is also like a nod to the original, but it's new, it's fresh. And one thing that really struck me when I saw this piece is the way the mother is turning away. Like, I think that is so powerful in a way that I would never have imagined myself. That I love that. I love the way it shows their dynamic in like one scene. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, Audrey like killed it with this. I love just like also what was help like some of the stories that had like a more historical setting. I did kind of ask like I was like, can you place it in a time, like if there's a specific time and place. I asked that and forwarded it to the artist. And this, I know Audrey did like research for all the interior design of this, like the windows, that like basin. And I just really love how it embodies this time period.
Yeah, every detail is perfect.
Yeah, it's so good. And then let me pull up. Oh, I can't. Hold on. Here we go. And I'll pull up our last little illustration that I also love. And this is Catherine's for Balloon Girl, obviously. This is drawn by Joy San. And Catherine, we already talked about this, but if you want to say a little something about it.
Yeah, I love the hair so much, like how staticky it is, and like it's coming up on both of them, which is like perfect and connecting. It's just like so good. I also my boyfriend got me the original that
Really?
that Joy did.
Yay!
I love that we're all just like, yes, we need this art. But yeah, I really love it. And it's so funny actually, because I had read like Junji Ito stories before, but he actually has like a balloon story about balloon people that I hadn't read until like afterwards. But I have decided retroactively to be in conversation. I'm like, I am now officially, it's fine. But I love that like this is like such like a cute like interpretation, and I think it matches like the story really well because it's like weirdly like childish. Like I wanted it to have like almost like a child nightmare story vibe. So I think it's like super cute, and I also just have the art.
That's amazing. Oh, it's so cool. I think Mega also has the original art, with the eggshells and the face, which I'm like very jealous of. Yeah, this is so cool. That's another good point. Like this looks like something that could be like scribbled almost like in like a teen girl's like diary or something. Yeah, I love it a lot. I'm so glad y'all like the art that you got for your stories. When we were putting together the project, I was like, why is there not more illustrated novels? Like it's such a treat. Like one of my favorite illustrators back in like the old days is Joseph Clement Cole. And he would actually illustrate for oh my gosh, why can't I think of who writes Sherlock Holmes? Why can't I think of the name?
Doyle.
What's his name? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he had another series that he liked to write that was like adventure, I think he's like a pirate or something. Sorry, I can't remember the title, but this artist would illustrate all his novels and they're like incredible. They're so beautiful. And I was like, we need more illustrated stories. So anyway, I'm just like really thrilled that we got your stories and we got to have these beautiful pieces with them. Okay, we're kind of coming up on an hour. If anyone has any questions in the audience, feel free to like drop them in the chat or the Q&A. I think for like the last question, and we can kind of wrap up. I guess maybe like what are some of like your horror inspirations? This can be like actual works, or just things that you're in conversation with. Maybe things that you don't like that you wanted to do a take on eventually. Like, I'm just interested in your perspectives on horror, because I know some of our authors have never written horror before, like Kei Ming Chang, who is like now this like she said it like opened the floodgates for her and she wants to write horror now. So I'm excited to kind of know like what are your perspectives and feelings on writing horror.
I can go if that's
Yeah.
I love like deciding retroactively to be in conversation with things. Like when something new comes out, I'm like, I'm in conversation with this now.
Yeah.
I just do that for myself. But I guess like a movie that I've like always loved is Satoshi Kon's Perfect Blue. I think thematically there's like a lot of that in my own work with like mirrors and masking and like I love that movie a lot. And then I think like a short story writer I really love is Carmen Maria Machado. Like I loved her short stories, and I think that was when like seeing like a retelling specifically of The Green Ribbon Girl was when I was like, oh my gosh, you can just do that, like it's fine. Like I guess I hadn't really seen that before, so like I feel like that really like made me feel like I can do this. Like I see how other people are doing it, so it's like very inspiring.
Awesome. Endria, what about you?
Yeah. Well, first, horror is one of my favorite genres to write in. I think in part because I read so much horror growing up and watched so much horror, specifically like watched a lot of 1950s horror movies with my dad. That was in the era of like just supersized everything in the wake of like radiation and nuclear warfare. So it was like giant ants or giant moths or giant people or giant like monsterized normal things. And so I love kind of drawing on like my repository of just images or books. And so I think the story is a little bit in that vein of like, oh, like let's take a somewhat mundane thing and just make it really big, and then it gets pretty scary.
Right.
I think it's also specifically in conversation with the Audubon Field Guide entry for barn owls, which is just, I'm going to put I don't know if I can chat to everyone, but I put a link to their field guide.
Okay. Interesting.
And yeah, just sometimes certain images of birds seem like horrifying to me. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Oh, interesting. Very cool. What about you, Kelsea?
So I actually spent most of my life leaning away from horror. And I would say, I think looking back, the reason is because I've always had such a vivid, nightmarish imagination already. Like I always had this fear that if I like watched too much, read too much horror, everything, then like my whole life would just be terror. Like I have nightmares very regularly, and like falling asleep, I tend to just picture, like have these intrusive, like very nightmarish pictures pop into my head for some reason. So I feel like I just kind of hid from it for the longest time and tried to just suppress it. But a few years ago, this was, as I mentioned, the short story that got me writing short stories in the first place was also the first horror piece that I ever wrote.
Oh, okay.
And it came from a place of like grief and pain and feeling like I couldn't write anything else until I tried writing horror. And then just sort of all came out, and then much like you described, it was sort of the floodgates opening. Since then I've written almost entirely horror.
Oh wow, awesome.
And I love reading and writing it now, so it's definitely flipped something for me. And I realized that like I think it's helped a lot to just recognize that it's a part of who I am and lean into it. And in a way it's helped me deal with it, I guess, instead of just hiding.
That is so cool. I'm so glad. I'm excited for more horror stories from you then. Very exciting. Well, so cool. You know, I'm so happy I got to speak to all of you and hear your readings tonight. We could probably wrap up now. We're not getting any questions in the chat. But yeah, thank you so much. Your readings are amazing. Thank you, Firestorm and Ash, for hosting us. And yeah, please grab the book from Firestorm. You can order it online or go into the shop and grab it. Yay!
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for taking the time tonight to share your work with us. This is just it's really incredible collaboration. I'm so glad you were able to bring some of the art and share that with folks who are in attendance tonight. So if you haven't picked up a copy yet, there's more of it in the book. It's a great way to support these authors, to make sure projects like this continue, and support Firestorm as well. Everyone who registered for this event, you'll get a follow-up email with a link to watch the recording as well, so you can revisit some of the readings that were done tonight. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to share with us. And I hope you have a good evening.
Yay! Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Ash.
Good
All
night
right.
now. Goodbye,
Good
everyone.
night.